What happens when one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts refuses to hold back against one of America's most famous relationship experts? In just 30 seconds, a guest appearance on The View turned into an all-out war that left the studio audience speechless and one major celebrity storming off the set. Before we break down every shocking moment of this explosive confrontation, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the feuds they don't want you to know about, and the moments that celebrities wish they could take back. Hit that subscribe button right now because you won't believe what we're about to show you. Last night's episode of The View was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. Steve Harvey was there to talk about his latest comedy tour and his upcoming projects. The audience was excited, the energy in the studio was high, and everything seemed perfectly normal. But within minutes of sitting down at that famous table, things took a turn that nobody saw coming. When Steve first walked out onto the stage, the audience gave him a standing ovation. He was all smiles, waving to the crowd, doing his signature Steve Harvey charm routine. He hugged Whoopi, he hugged Sarah, he hugged Sonny, he hugged Alyssa. When he got to Joy, there was a moment, just a brief second, where you could see something in her eyes. Something that said this wasn't going to be the friendly interview everyone expected. But Steve didn't seem to notice. The show started off friendly enough. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed Steve to the table with her usual warmth, and the other co-hosts were all smiles. Steve was in his element, telling stories about his life, making everybody laugh with his trademark humor. The audience was eating it up, laughing at every punchline. Sarah Haynes asked him about his upcoming comedy tour, and Steve launched into stories about getting back on the road, about how much he missed performing live. He was animated, gesturing with his hands, doing voices, really putting on a show. The cameras loved it. Sonny Hostin asked about his TV shows, about Family Feud, about all his different projects. Steve talked about how blessed he felt, how grateful he was for his career. It was all very heartwarming, very positive. Alyssa Farrah Griffin brought up his family, and Steve's face lit up. He started talking about his wife, about his kids, about being a grandfather. He was glowing with pride, talking about family values, about legacy, about what really matters in life. But through all of this, Joy Behar sat quietly. She wasn't smiling like the others. She wasn't nodding along. She had this look on her face like she was waiting, calculating, choosing her moment. Her arms were crossed. Anyone watching closely could see that something was brewing. And that's when Joy finally leaned forward. She had been quiet during the initial questions, sitting back in her chair, with her arms crossed. Anyone who watches The View regularly knows that look. It's the look Joy gets when she's waiting for her moment, when she's got something on her mind that she's ready to unleash. And when she finally spoke up, the entire energy in that studio shifted. "Steve, I want to ask you about something," Joy said, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the friendly atmosphere. "You've made a career out of giving relationship advice, telling women how to act, how to get a man, how to keep a man. You've written best-selling books about it. But some of the things you've said over the years, they're pretty outdated, don't you think?" The shift in energy was immediate. The audience got quiet. You could actually hear the change, the way the laughter just evaporated from the room. Steve's smile faltered just a little bit, but he kept his composure. "What do you mean by that, Joy?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, trying to keep his tone light, but you could hear the edge creeping in. "I mean, the stuff about how women need to submit to their men, how we need to let men be the leaders of the household, how we shouldn't challenge our partners too much because it threatens their masculinity." Joy continued, not breaking eye contact with him. This is 2025, Steve. Women don't need to be told how to act anymore. We don't need relationship gurus telling us to make ourselves smaller so men can feel bigger. The other co-hosts exchanged glances. Sarah looked uncomfortable. Sunny looked intrigued, but cautious. This wasn't the light-hearted interview they had planned. This was Joy going completely off script. Whoopi tried to jump in. Well, everyone has different perspectives on relationships, she said diplomatically. But Joy wasn't backing down. She kept her eyes locked on Steve. Joy, I think you're misunderstanding my message, Steve said. And you could hear the defensiveness starting to creep into his voice. I've always been about empowering people to have better relationships, men and women both. I'm not telling anyone to be smaller. I'm telling people how to build strong partnerships based on respect. Really? Joy shot back, and now her voice was getting louder. Because I've read your books, Steve. I've watched your shows, and a lot of what you say sounds like it's straight out of the 1950s. Women should cook for their man. Women should dress nice for their man. Women should make sure their man feels respected and admired. What about what women need? What about women being respected? What about women not having to perform for male approval? Steve's jaw tightened. You could see the muscles working in his face. The cameras were capturing every sign of tension. This was no longer a promotional interview. This was turning into a full-blown confrontation. Really? Joy shot back. Because I've read your books, Steve. I've watched your shows. And a lot of what you say sounds like it's straight out of the 1950s. Women should cook for their man. Women should dress nice for their man. Women should make sure their man feels respected. What about what women need? What about women being respected? Steve's jaw tightened. The cameras were capturing every second of this, and the audience was completely silent. This was no longer a promotional interview. This was turning into something much bigger. I have 3 daughters, Joy, Steve said, his voice getting louder now, his finger pointing at the table for emphasis. 3 daughters that I love more than anything in this world. 3 strong, independent, successful daughters. You think I don't want them to be respected? You think I'm out here telling women to be doormats? That's not what I do, and you know it. Then explain the comments you made about women in comedy. Joy fired back without missing a beat. She wasn't giving him any room to breathe. You went on record saying that women aren't as funny as men. You said it's harder to take female comedians seriously. You said men are naturally better at comedy than women. How is that empowering women, Steve? How is that supporting your daughters? The audience gasped. Several people in the crowd put their hands over their mouths. A few people started murmuring to each other. This was the moment where things went from tense to explosive. Steve's face changed completely. The friendly, charming TV personality was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely angry. That's taken out of context, Steve said, pointing his finger directly at Joy now. That was years ago, and I was talking about my own experience in comedy clubs in the 80s and 90s when I was coming up. I wasn't saying women can't be funny. I was talking about how the industry was back then, how male-dominated it was. You're twisting my words. Am I? Joy pressed, her voice sharp and unwavering. Because you didn't correct yourself. You never came out and said, hey, I was wrong about that. You never said, women are just as funny as men. You let those comments sit out there for years, and a lot of people took them as your real opinion. Young girls who want to be comedians heard those words from you. Steve Harvey, Mr. Family Feud, Mr. Relationship Expert, and they heard that they're not as funny as boys. What do you say to those girls, Steve? Alyssa Farah Griffin tried to step in, raising her hand. Maybe we should, Move to a different topic? This is getting pretty heated and... But Joy held up her hand, cutting Alyssa off. No, Joy said firmly. We're not moving on. This is important. She turned back to Steve. And another thing, since we're being honest here. You made millions of dollars, literally millions, telling women how to land a man, how to think like a man, how to act like a lady, but think like a man. But you've been married 3 times, Steve. 3 times. So maybe, just maybe, you're not the authority on relationships that you think you are. The studio went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. That was the line. That was the moment where this confrontation went past the point of no return. Steve Harvey stood up from his chair so fast that it scraped loudly against the floor. His microphone was still on, and everyone could hear how hard he was breathing. You're going to sit there and attack my personal life? Steve said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. You're going to bring up my marriages on national television? You're going to sit here in front of millions of people and throw my failed relationships in my face? That's low, Joy. That's really damn low, even for you. Joy didn't stand up yet, but she leaned forward even more, her elbows on the table. You made your personal life public, Steve. You wrote books about it. You talk about your relationships on your radio show, on your TV shows, in your comedy specials. You use your marriages as credentials for why people should listen to your relationship advice. So yeah, it's fair game. If you're going to profit off your personal life, you don't get to cry foul when someone points out the contradictions. Whoopi Goldberg was trying desperately to regain control of the show. Okay. Let's all just take a breath here, she said, her voice firm but also clearly stressed. This is getting too heated. We're all adults here. But nobody was listening to Whoopi. Steve and Joy were locked in, staring each other down like 2 fighters in a ring. The audience was watching this unfold like it was the most dramatic thing they'd ever seen. Some people looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others looked absolutely thrilled to be here, their phones out, probably recording every second. You know what your problem is, Joy? Steve said, and now he was fully in confrontation mode, his voice booming through the studio. Your problem is that you think you're always right about everything. You think you can sit up here at this table and judge everyone who walks through that door, tear everyone down, act like you're better than everyone else. But you're not. You're just another person with opinions, and your opinions aren't facts. My opinions are based on reality. Joy shot back, standing up now too, matching his energy. Based on the actual words that come out of your mouth, Steve. Based on the things you've written in your books. I'm not making this stuff up. You said these things. You wrote these things. And when women like me call you out on it, when we point out the problems with what you're saying, you get defensive instead of listening. That's the problem. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair completely. She was sinking lower and lower. Sunny Hostin was frozen, her pen still in her hand. The producers were probably absolutely losing their minds in the control room. But the cameras kept rolling. You don't want a conversation, Steve said, shaking his head, his voice dripping with bitterness. You don't want dialogue. You want to ambush people? You brought me here. Your people called my people. You invited me on this show under the pretense of promoting my comedy tour. And instead, you attacked me from the moment you opened your mouth. You came at me with an agenda. This was planned. I came at you with questions. Joy corrected him, her voice strong and unwavering. Questions that a lot of women have been asking about the things you say. Questions that deserve answers. If you can't handle being questioned about your own words, about the advice you give to millions of people, then maybe you shouldn't be in the business of being a public figure. I've helped thousands of couples, Steve argued, his arms spread wide. Thousands of people have better relationships, stronger marriages, happier lives because of the advice I've given them. I get letters every single day from people telling me how my books changed their lives. What have you done, Joy? What have you contributed to the world besides sitting here behind this table and tearing people down? I've spent my career speaking truth to power, Joy said, her voice steady and strong, not backing down an inch. I've called out bullshit when I see it, regardless of who it's coming from. Your advice might work for some people, Steve. I'll give you that. But for a lot of women, it's outdated and harmful. It reinforces gender stereotypes that we've been fighting against for decades. And somebody needs to say that to your face instead of just smiling and nodding and treating you like you're untouchable. Steve laughed. But it wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind of bitter, angry laugh someone makes when they're furious. Outdated and harmful, he repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. That's rich coming from someone who's been saying controversial stuff on this show for years. You've offended more people than I can count, Joy. You've made jokes that crossed the line. You're not exactly a saint sitting up there on your moral high horse. I never claimed to be a saint, Joy responded immediately, not missing a beat. I never claimed to be perfect. But I also don't sell books telling women they need to change themselves to please men. I don't go on TV telling young girls that they're not as good as boys at comedy. I don't build $1 million brand on relationship advice while my own relationships fall apart. I own my mistakes, Steve. I apologize when I'm wrong. Can you say the same? That was it. That was the final straw. Steve pulled off his microphone and threw it down on the table. Not just placed it down, threw it with force. The sound echoed through the studio like a gunshot. Several audience members actually jumped in their seats, startled by the noise. I'm done, Steve said, his voice loud enough that he didn't need the microphone anymore. His voice carried across the entire studio, bouncing off the walls. I'm done with this. I'm done with you. I came here to promote my tour, to have a nice conversation with some colleagues in the industry. And instead, I get ambushed by someone who clearly has an axe to grind. This is unprofessional. This is disrespectful. And I'm not going to sit here and take it for one more second. Whoopi tried one more time to salvage the situation. She stood up, putting her hands out. Steve, come on now, she said, her voice pleading. Let's just take a breath here. Let's all calm down and talk this through like adults. We can work this out. But Steve wasn't hearing it. He shook his head firmly. No, Whoopi, no. There's no working this out. There's no calming down. This woman just attacked my character, my career, my personal life on live television. You want me to calm down? You want to know what's disrespectful? Joy called after him, her voice rising to match his volume. Not taking responsibility for the impact of your words. Not acknowledging when you've said something that hurts people. Not listening when women tell you that your advice makes them feel less than. That's disrespectful, Steve. That's what's really unprofessional here. Steve turned back around, and for a moment it looked like he might actually walk back to the table to continue the argument. His face was red, his fists were clenched. But then he shook his head. You're impossible, he said, his voice slightly quieter but still full of emotion. You know that. You're absolutely impossible to have a real conversation with. Everything is a fight with you. Everything is a battle. Because some things are worth fighting for, Joy said, standing her ground, not backing down even a little bit. Women's equality is worth fighting for. Holding people accountable for the messages they put out into the world is worth fighting for. Making sure that young girls don't grow up thinking they need to change who they are to deserve love is worth fighting for. And if that makes me impossible in your eyes, then I'll wear that badge proudly. The two of them stared at each other across the studio. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The audience didn't know what to do. Some people were nodding in agreement with Joy. Others were shaking their heads, clearly feeling bad for Steve. Most people just sat there frozen, not wanting to miss a single second of this moment. This show used to be about real conversations, Steve said, his voice quieter now, but somehow even more intense. When Barbara Walters started this show, it was about women with different perspectives having honest discussions. Now it's just about attacking people. You all sit up here at this table like you're judges on some reality show, deciding who's good enough and who's not. It's toxic, Joy. What you're doing right now is toxic. What's toxic is telling women they need to act a certain way to be loved. Joy responded, her voice matching his intensity. What's toxic is using your massive platform to spread outdated gender roles, and then acting like a victim when someone calls you out on it. What's toxic is making millions of dollars off the insecurities of women, and then getting mad when those same women say, "Hey, this advice doesn't work for us." Don't come on this show and expect us to just smile and nod when you've said things that hurt people. I never hurt anyone, Steve said. And now there was real emotion in his voice. Not just anger anymore, but genuine hurt. I never set out to hurt anyone. Every piece of advice I've given, every word I've written, it all comes from a place of wanting to see people succeed in their relationships. I want people to be happy. I want people to find love. If you can't see that, if all you can see is some conspiracy where I'm trying to hold women back, then you're not paying attention. I'm paying very close attention, Joy said, her voice firm and unwavering. That's exactly the problem. I've paid attention to every outdated, sexist thing you've said over the years. I've listened to the way you talk about women needing to serve their men. I've heard you say that women who are too independent scare men away. I've watched you tell women that they need to lower their standards if they want to find a husband. And I'm calling you out on it. If you don't like it, that's your issue, not mine. Steve looked around at the other co-hosts, his arms spread wide. You all agree with this? He asked them, his voice desperate now. You all think it's okay to bring someone on your show and just attack them like this? Whoopi, Sarah, Sunny, and Alyssa all looked extremely uncomfortable. None of them seemed to know what to say. Answer me, Steve said when no one spoke up. Do you think this is okay? I think, Whoopi started carefully, that we're all getting a little heated here. Maybe we should... No, Steve interrupted her. No maybes. No taking a break. I want to know if you all support what Joy is doing right here, right now. Because if you do, then I know everything I need to know about this show. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. A few audience members coughed nervously. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second. You know what? Steve finally said. I don't even need an answer. The fact that none of you are speaking up tells me everything. You're all fine with this. You're all fine with bringing guests on this show just to tear them apart for ratings. That's not what this is, Joy said firmly. This is about accountability. This is about not giving people a free pass just because they're famous. You came on this show, Steve, and I asked you legitimate questions about things you've said publicly. If you can't handle that, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Legitimate questions, Steve repeated with a bitter laugh. Is that what you call bringing up someone's failed marriages on live television? Legitimate questions? When those marriages are part of your brand? Yes, Joy answered, without hesitation. You can't have it both ways, Steve. You can't use your personal life to sell books and then get mad when someone points out the contradictions. Steve picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. The audience realized what was happening. He was actually leaving. He was walking off the view in the middle of a live show. Several people started whispering to each other, pulling out their phones to record the moment. This is unbelievable, Steve said, putting on his jacket. I've done hundreds of interviews over my career, hundreds, and I've never been treated with such disrespect. You should be ashamed of yourself, Joy. You really should. I'm not ashamed of asking tough questions, Joy said, her arms crossed. And I'm not ashamed of standing up for women. If that bothers you, if that makes you uncomfortable, then good. Maybe you'll think twice before you give advice that makes women feel like they need to shrink themselves to make men happy. You're twisting everything I've ever said, Steve responded, his voice rising again. You're taking years of work, years of helping people, and you're turning it into something ugly. That's what you do, Joy. You take things out of context and you weaponize them. Your words are your words, Steve, Joy said calmly. I didn't twist anything. I literally quoted you back to yourself, and you didn't like hearing it. That's not my problem. That's yours. Steve shook his head one final time. He looked at Whoopi. I'm sorry it ended like this, he said to her. I respect you, Whoopi. I always have. But I can't sit here and be attacked. I just can't. Whoopi nodded, looking genuinely sad about how this had all played out. I understand, she said quietly. Steve took one last look at Joy. You won, he said to her. You got your viral moment. You got your headlines. I hope it was worth it. This isn't about winning, Joy said. This is about speaking the truth. Your truth, Steve corrected her. Not the truth, your truth. And with that, Steve Harvey walked off the set of The View. He didn't say goodbye to the audience. He didn't shake hands with any of the other co-hosts. He just walked straight across the studio floor, past the cameras, past the producers, and out the door. The sound of the door closing echoed through the studio. And for a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They all just sat there, processing what had just happened. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. A few people started clapping, but it was scattered and uncertain. Most people just sat there in shock, trying to figure out if what they just witnessed was real. Joy Behar sat back down at the table. Her expression was serious, her jaw set. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look happy. She just looked like someone who had said what she needed to say and was prepared to deal with whatever consequences came from it. Whoopi Goldberg took a deep breath and looked directly at the camera. Well, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos, that was intense. We're going to take a quick break. But as the show went to commercial, everyone in that studio knew that this wasn't just another heated moment on The View. This was something much bigger. This was the kind of confrontation that would be talked about for days, maybe weeks. The kind of moment where two strong personalities clashed so hard that there was no going back, no smoothing it over, no pretending it didn't happen. Steve Harvey had walked off the set, and Joy Behar had refused to back down. The battle lines had been drawn, and there was no middle ground left to stand on.